Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles.
Chase Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome back in Operation Domination, Divisional Round DFS, and a 2026 look ahead for your Dynasty leagues. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined here with the full crew, Chase Thornton and Adam LaRue. Make sure you download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and check out our video content on the Fantasy Football Advice Network at FF Advice Net. It was a crazy wild card round. I have to say, though, I won some money on my DFS leagues, so that was good. I also won some money on my bets. Don't forget, I come back here, the next day with Chaz Florey Sports Betting Weekly, and my article on the huddle went 7 of 3 for the 10-player props that I wrote out. So we're going to keep that ball rolling throughout the playoffs here. Content never stopping on the Operation Domination. Gents, I want to get quick reactions from you guys, though, from this wild card round. Start with Adam. What did you guys think of the weekend?
Good weekend of NFL football, man. I was excited to watch it. I hate to say it, Chase, but the Bears-Packers game was one of the more exciting games of the weekend. It was a really good football game if you're watching from a neutral standpoint. So I had a lot of fun. I know that it sucked, but nonetheless.
Yeah, as a football fan, great weekend of football for the most part. I mean, the last 2 games were a little bit interesting, but I mean, for the most part, it was a great weekend of football. Okay. And even that Monday night game ended up being, it was close till the fourth quarter, and then all hell kind of the wheels fell off. But yeah, as a Packer fan, yeah, it is everything I could do not to, shoot myself in the face after that one. But as a football fan, you're right. I mean, what a game, what an epic comeback and finish by the Bears. They're just an absolute, we'll talk a little bit more about it, in just a minute here, but yeah, wow. What an opening weekend. They said that through the first 4 games, there was already more lead changes than there had ever been. And in the fourth quarter, there were more fourth quarter lead changes through those first 4 games this weekend than there had ever been in a postseason. It was just ridiculous. Every single one of those games came down to the last 2 minutes.
The wild card round was a perfect reflection of what this postseason group of teams is, which is nobody is really a head lead alpha dog runaway type of favorite. Like, you got Seattle, we like Denver, got a number 1 seed, but I feel like everybody thinks this whole thing is wide open, and the wild card round was definitely a reflection of just how wide open this thing actually is. Of course, I was happy as a San Francisco 49er fan. Still not happy got put on a short week. Not happy we were going to Seattle on a Saturday night, but I wasn't happy when they were playing the Eagles and they got that draw and lost on the first seed too. So maybe beautiful things can happen. Hey, Fred Warner, give me a miracle. So we'll see what happens with that. But today, of course, is about DFS. It's about the Dynasty look ahead, and I'm thirsty.
Yeah, I'm thirsty too. We got to get this going here. I honestly have not had anything to eat except for the garnishes that I put together when I was mixing this cocktail up earlier today to, as a trial run, as a test run. So, I need something in my stomach here, and we're going to get it going here. Yeah, what a great opening weekend, like we said, of the playoffs, and we've got more coming for you. Like you said, Dan, we cashed out last week. We had some good calls with good plays last week. Travis Etienne ended up going off and having a day. Could have even had more of a day, in my opinion, if they'd have wanted to. But I wanted to start off. You said something last week. Like, I liked the way you approached your lineup last week, Dan. How you said, "Well, let me talk about the guys that I have to have in my lineup." And you talked about Puka Nacua and that. But those are the guys you had to have in your lineup. And then, okay, how am I going to fill in around that? Because I think it was a good jumping off point for us for a discussion that we've touched on in this space before in previous, weeks, previous years. And it probably warrants a bigger discussion at some point here this offseason in terms of roster construction and game planning for the type of game that you are playing. We talk about in this space for this segment. I like to remind people all the time, we're looking at cash games. We're looking at cash game. We're not looking at tournament GPP style plays. We're looking at cash games mostly in this lineup. When I'm putting my lineup suggestions together for the public, that's what I'm talking about in this space. And there is a big difference in your roster construction between cash games and between GPP tournament type plays. If everybody is going to have that top guy, if everybody's paying up for Puka Nacua this week, in a cash game setting, you probably need to have a guy like that in your lineup, because remember what the goal is in a cash game. If 50% of the places are paying out, you only have to be different than you only have to beat 50% of the people playing to get your money back or get whatever the prize is. So if everybody's going to have that big chalky play and that dude goes off, you almost have to have that guy in your lineup if you're going to have any chance of winning, because you have to also have that big floor of points that guy's going to give you. But in a tournament setting, when you're talking about not 50% of the places paying out, you're talking about 20% or fewer of the places paying out, and only a small percentage or small fraction of those is paying out anything of any worth. You have to be different than 95, 97% of the rest of the field if you want to make your lineup work. And so I really liked the idea, like you said, you had to have Puka Nacua in your lineup last week. Well, how'd that work out for everybody? Because he kind of went off. It was a great play. It was a chalky play. And sure enough, we went with ETN, who was, facing, like we said, the worst run defense that was left in the playoffs. And he had a pretty dang good game. And if you had started your lineup out with guys like that, you probably did pretty well. So, like I said, that's probably a discussion that we'll have in greater depth at some point here this offseason when we do talk about strategies and roster constructions and things like that. It's kind of an offshoot of the same thing that we talk about during, our draft prep, coming into the beginning of the season, where know your rules, know how your league scoring system is set up, and then build your lineup accordingly. DFS, understand what you're playing for. Understand if you're in a general GPP setting where you need to be differentiated between everybody, or if you're in that cash game setting where you're only looking at beating out 50% of the people and needing to be a little more chalky and a little less risky in your picks. So anything you want to add to that, Dan, or is that kind of how you've been looking at things all along?
Well, the only thing I would add to that is the differential in the playoffs. When you're playing DFS tournament versus cash games, they become almost similar football games because there's only a finite pool to pull from in the first place. So in a way, tournaments become much closer to cash games, which I think opens up the opportunity for the people who are not in that top 1% who consistently win in those tournaments for DFS, for all the rest of us who like to play too and don't have, tons of money to be dropping, the max out the entry fees that you possibly can, which is how these guys mostly win for the most part. So it does get closer to that. And therefore I think the margin becomes better for people who maybe are not as serious. So I would add that in for the playoffs.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. Simple math. As that pool of players that everybody has available to them gets smaller, now, everybody is picking from that same small pool. So even if you don't have a ton of experience in this, or like you said, you can't afford to do 120 entries, because of the smaller pool, your chances will at least your chances of your type of a lineup hitting increase, even if your chance of winning doesn't necessarily. Well, yeah, no, I like that. But that's a great point. Well, let's get started talking about some specific players here. We talked about Puka Nacua last week and haven't have him in your lineup this week. This week, we're going to go right back, and at least from my standpoint, we're going to go right back to the well there with the Rams. I'm going to start talking about Matthew Stafford here at 6,600. He is the QB2 in terms of what he's going to cost you this week for salary, but he's the QB1 in ECR ranking for this week. On the season, he was the only quarterback that pretty much rivaled anything that Josh Allen was doing on a consistent week-to-week basis. He ended up as your quarterback 2 in points per game and in overall points, right behind Josh Allen. And Stafford it was basically his second best fantasy season of his career at age 37. I mean, the guy was just phenomenal this year from a fantasy standpoint. Career high 46 touchdown passes from a guy that we typically think of as a touchdown thrower is pretty awesome. He was helped out a lot by Puka finally reaching double-digit touchdowns and by his tight ends playing like all world. But, he's protecting the ball this year as well. He only had 8 interceptions on the season. We know that a guy like Matthew Stafford, we always talk about, we like to have those mobile quarterback guys. Well, Matthew Stafford, especially the way he's playing this year, is one of those guys that can be the exception to that rule. He literally had 1 yard rushing this season, 1 positive yard rushing after everything was tallied up, which was the lowest of his entire career. But I just told you, he had his second best fantasy season. He's the one of the few guys that doesn't need to run to get you points in on the fantasy steam. Last week, 300 plus yards, 3 touchdowns versus Carolina there. Chicago is the best remaining matchup for quarterbacks here. They give up the 6th most points to the position. I'm willing to roll the dice with Stafford there. This is a game on Sunday. This is the late game on Sunday, as Dan was lamenting earlier. This is the game with the highest over-under on the slate, highest point total on the slate, 48.5 when I looked at it earlier this afternoon. And the Rams are a road favorite, 3.5. But to get there, they're going to have to score some points in a game that we expect could be a shootout of sorts. So I'll roll with Stafford at 6,600, and I am going to pair him again with Puka Nacua, guy we talked about a little bit last week. He's at 9,000. He's the most expensive dude on the slate, whether you talk about receivers or any other position. But he was also the runaway number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, points per game total, period. Word of caution, he probably doesn't see 18 targets again this week, but it's Puka, dude. I mean, we're talking about, like I said, hands down the best fantasy receiver in the game this season. Set career highs across the board in terms of, targets and receptions and touchdowns. He was top 3 in the league among receivers in all of those. And then last week, hey, Dan told you to play him. I backed that up and seconded that motion, and he was a wide receiver 1 for the week, just had a monster game. Chicago, again, great matchup for wide receivers. They give up the 2nd most points in the league on the season, which is by far the worst of any team that's remaining in the playoffs. And if you look at it last week, I mean, we talked about that crazy game with Green Bay. Jordan Love threw 4 touchdowns last week and 300 some yards, 340 something yards, I think it was. It was not Jordan Love's fault that they lost that game. It was not the receiver's fault. Romeo Doubs had a big game. Matthew Golden finally scored and got in the end zone. Jaden Reed scored and had a big game. Christian Watson scored for you as well. And he was another guy that we had talked about, on the lineup last week. Don't overthink it. You're going to have to save money elsewhere because you're paying up at 9,000 for Nacua, but this is kind of one of those must plays, especially in a cash game type format here. So I'm going to run with Stafford at 6,600, Nacua at 9,000, and we'll figure the rest of the lineup, and figure out some savings elsewhere in the lineup. Dan, Adam, anything you guys want to second those motions, or you guys want to bring that up as I, get my drink prepared here?
I think you'd be crazy not to put Puka Nacua in your lineup. I don't care that he's 9,000. I don't care if he's a chalky play. Again, we talked about this. Some chalky plays are just going to have to be made. Where I differ from you is I'm going back to the well on Caleb and Luther Burden from a week ago. And I know Luther didn't show up quite as much, but you still have Roma Dunze, who's questionable, not 100%. You still have DJ Moore, who's questionable, not 100% heading into this game. And Luther Burden just needs a couple of big plays. He's sitting at $4,700. So he's one of my cheaper plays at the wide receiver position. Caleb made big play after big play after big play to let Chicago win that game, right? So for me, him at $6,100, plus I know that if he wants to, he can take off and run. That's a price tag that I want to go with at the quarterback position. And one I think people aren't really necessarily looking at, James Cook at $7,300 is the high price running back that I want to go to. When you actually commit yourself to running at Denver, they have allowed teams to run on them at times this year. This sets up to be a better game for James Cook this time around than it was against Jacksonville, whose run defense is better, in my opinion. And then on the flip side of that, though, I want RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey hasn't been the most explosive, hasn't always gotten the most work that you would want him to, but what he does do is score touchdowns, and there's a matchup where I think he'll get a couple of touchdowns in this game, quite possibly. So those are some key plays that I'm looking at. Oh, let's not forget, I am going back to the well on Jake Tonjes, who does nothing but produce whenever George Kittle's been out this entire year. And you want to talk about dirt cheap, this guy's sitting at $3,400. So those are some of my key plays this weekend. Adam, what do you got?
Yeah, no, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head. I mean, as the pool of players gets as small as it has gotten, there's a lot less guys to choose from. And it's tough, because at tight end, for example, like Hunter Henry, Dawson Knox are great options. But when Tonjes is as cheap as he is and is the option that he is, it's hard to really talk about anyone else. So, no, I don't really have too much of anyone to give you that I think is better than the guys that you've thrown out there, to be honest with you. I think it'd be throwing out other options who are good, but not as good.
I do want to add Christian Kirk in. Sorry, I wanted to talk about Christian Kirk a little bit. Had the big game. Nico Collins, I'd be shocked if this guy was able to come out of concussion protocol after that hit last week. So Christian Kirk, they're going to have to lean on somebody. He was the guy that they went to. I would suspect that they would go to him again against the Patriots here. And he's only $4,100. So I don't need him to have the huge monster game that he had a week ago to pay off at that price tag too. So that's somebody else to throw in.
No, those are all good suggestions. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth here about two of those suggestions. But first, we're going to start mixing this drink up here. This week, we're going to, in honor of the absolute beatdown, the old-fashioned beatdown that the Bears laid on my Packers in the fourth quarter of that game last week, we are going to make a beatdown old-fashioned. And this is, one of my takes on what we call the Wisconsin old-fashioned. We've made that before on the show, but with brandy, we're going to make it a little bit different today. We're going to start off. It is blood orange season. If you guys have listened to me make old fashions before, I love blood oranges in an old fashioned. I like the little bit of different, a little bit more complex taste that they impart to it. So I'm going to start off with some blood orange slice in the bottom of my old fashioned glass here. And then to that, we are going to add a teaspoonful of real maple syrup. That's going to be our sweetener for this. A lot of times when you make a Wisconsin old fashioned, you use a sugar cube. Some people use like a packet of sugar. I like to use simple syrup just because I can control the grittiness and the portions of that a little bit better. But we're going to put real maple syrup in that, 1 teaspoonful. We're also going to put a couple of dashes. Actually, for me, it's going to be a little more than a couple of dashes of Angostura bitters in that. Then we're going to have to muddle that up. And remember, when you're muddling fruit for a drink, for a cocktail, you are not, I've said it before, I'll say it again, you're not mulching it. You're not trying to shred it. We don't want to pulverize the thing and be sucking pulp up the straw the whole drink. You're trying to express the oils. If you ever see a bartender smack a mint sprig before they garnish your drink with it, it's the same kind of thing. They're not trying to crush that mint up for you to drink it. They're trying to express the oils in it for the aroma and for the flavor to be imparted into the drink. So we've got that muddled up just a little bit there. And then I'm going to add some ice to this. And while I add the ice to this, I'm going to talk about RJ Harvey at 6,200. You brought him up, Dan, and I really like that play this week. RJ Harvey, listen, attacking Buffalo on the ground is where it's at. I told you they're the worst run defense, lowest ranked run defense left in the playoffs here. And that's where you want to go to attack this team. Like you said, Harvey doesn't necessarily always get the workload that we wish he could or that we want him to, but he's been really good. Since that Dobbins injury, he's the clear number one in Denver there. And Etienne was RB2 overall last week. He was 5 for 5 for 49 yards and a touchdown in the pass game. And he averaged 6.7 yards per carry against this Buffalo defense. That sounds to me like the kind of thing RJ Harvey can do all day long if they give him the football. And I think that they will. I think that they'll be smart enough to know where their bread should be buttered against this Buffalo defense here. The last 6 weeks of the season, basically since their Denver's bye week, RJ Harvey was the running back 8 overall. Buffalo gives up the 8th most points in the league of any team out of the 32. They give up the 8th most points to the running back position. And again, I think they'll use Harvey in that pass game. So even if they fall behind a little bit, I don't think that he gets scripted out. I really like that RJ Harvey suggestion. So we're going to roll with RJ Harvey at 6,200. So I've got my muddled stuff up here and I put my ice in there. Then for the alcohol in this, we're going to use what's called B&B by Dom. You may have heard of a B&B for a cocktail that stands for brandy and Benedictine. That's an actual separate kind of cocktail itself. This is an actual product made by Dom called B&B, brandy and Benedictine mixed. Benedictine, if you're not familiar with it, is a French herbal liqueur. So a Franche liqueur, as the French would say, I guess. But we're going to use 2 ounces of the B&B in here. Add that to our glass here. And then you can go a couple of different ways when you're making an old fashioned in Wisconsin. You can either go sweet, you can go sour, or you can go press. If you've watched me enough, you know I like to go sour, and that means you're going to use a sour mix or my favorite, squirt soda. You're going to float that right on top, and you're going to mix that in and add that to the top of what you already have in the glass there, okay? You could do it sweet, and that typically means you're going to use either like Sprite or 7-Up, some other kind of lemon lime soda, or you can do what's called press, and press means you're going to go half lemon lime soda and half club soda. That kind of cuts down on the sweetness. Some people like that a little more. It's going to allow the spirit to be a little more forward rather than quite so sweet. especially when we've already got the maple syrup and the Benedictine. The B&B can be a little sweet on its own as well. So that's what we're putting in there. That's our drink mixed up. I will garnish that in a second. We'll talk about garnishes. But in the meantime, I'm going to second your motion on both of you guys on talking about Jake Tonjes at 3,400 at tight end. If you want to pay up for Puka Nacua, if you want to pay up for James Cook or CMC or those kinds of guys, you're going to need to pay down at somewhere. And one of the places you can do that, and I think you can do it with absolute confidence this week, is that tight end position. Week 1 versus Seattle, Jake Tonjes caught 3 balls for 15 yards and a touchdown, scored 10.5 DraftKings points. From weeks 4 through 6 this season, he was absolutely outstanding. He scored 43.7 DraftKings points overall there. He was the tight end 7, tight end 10, tight end 13. 2 of those games were with Mac Daddy Jones, but the other game was with Brock Purdy. You look a couple of weeks ago when they played Chicago, and he was 7 of 9 for 60 yards and a score. He was the tight end 3 overall with 19 DraftKings points. This is a guy that we've seen fill in for George Kittle throughout the season and do a danged admirable job with it. And it didn't matter if it was Brock Purdy or Mac Jones. So I really think Jake Tonjes is a guy who, were he in a different situation, were he not George Kittle's backup, because George Kittle is a top 3 tight end in this entire league, I think he could be starting on a lot of teams in this league. He's got a lot of skills that I think, do bode well for what we do in the fantasy realm anyway. He's cheap this week. It's a good matchup. Seattle gives up the 11th most points to the tight end position. We know San Francisco loves tight end. We know they're not going to have their favorite tight end, George Kittle. The offense has been hot enough. I'm willing to pay down for Tonjes at 3,400. Okay. So on top of this, we've added our floats, so now we've got our cocktail made. I like to garnish with cherries. Some people, especially if they go with a sour build, they'll go with, say, pickled mushrooms, or they'll go with olives. If they do sour, typically people put cherries with the sweet. But as I've told you guys before, I like to use the Luxardo cherries, or the more not the bright red sundae cherries that you find by the ice cream toppings at your store. I like to use the Luxardos. I think the flavor with those blends really well with the blood orange, with the B&B, the Benedictine. So there's our cocktail, Slangeva for the week. My additions that I would just like to kind of half point out, and then I'll let you guys kind of chime in here. I really like the New England running backs against Houston, but you kind of have to, you're going to have to kind of roll the dice with your dude. You're going to have to pick out which guy do you think is going to be, the more effective guy. Travion Henderson is explosive, but they have loved them some Ramondre Stevenson, and he's looked good when they have given him the ball. But I like them if you're looking for kind of a mid-tier, pay option. You're going to have to find the cheap wide receiver. Last week, hey, there were a ton of them to choose from if you got it right. Christian Kirk, who we mentioned, Jalen Coker, Romeo Doubs, Robinson from your 49ers there, Dan. There were a lot of cheaper wide receivers last week that went off. You got to play at least 3 wide receivers. If you're going to pay up for Nacua and pay up for some of these other guys, you're going to have to find cheaper options there. Brandon Cooks saw 5 targets last week. I'm not going to necessarily recommend him, but with Houston missing Collins, I agree with you that Christian Kirk is a great look for not a lot of money there. I will also say that in the interest of saving some money, if there were ever a week that you wanted to maybe use a tight end in your flex, you've got good matchups for Colston Loveland. You've got Colby Parkinson, is going to score, points for the Rams. It would be one way to save money, although I don't typically recommend starting 2 tight ends. But with Tonjes being our starting lineup guy, I could be persuaded to see the case for a guy like Kincaid or Loveland or Parkinson like that. Dan, Adam, anything you guys want to add about our DFS lineups here as I get going on this drink?
Instead of the Patriot running backs, I would like to go with Zach Charbonnet at $5,300. The actual worst run defense in the playoffs left is the San Francisco run defense, and Zach Charbonnet scores touchdowns of the 2 between him and Kenneth Walker. So I'm going to take those bigger points because it's a crapshoot as far as who's actually going to get the ball more. It's a crapshoot as far as who's going to catch the ball more. But Zach Charbonnet, as far as him being the guy that they get into inside the 20, inside the 10, inside the 5, and score, that is Zach Charbonnet 100%. So $5,300, that's the guy I'm going with flex.
He's $200 cheaper than his teammate Walker too. So no matter what, again, look at what's actually happening on the field. Doesn't matter what we all think of whether Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet is the better running back. Like Dan just laid out the case for why you would want to go with Charbonnet there, but he's a $200 savings over his teammate as well. So good point there. In fact, I did build lineups. I built at least 2 different lineups with Seattle running backs as well. So good point. Slangeva, good luck, everybody. Let's go win some money.
Now let's take a look at 2026.
Hot and so hot in here.
All right, we're going to split this up a little bit. First of all, we got to talk about how the playoffs last week has impacted Dynasty, because we'll start off with it. Dan, we've got a real impactful one from your team. George Kittle has been, granted, he got hurt earlier this season as well, but largely over the last 5-6 years has been one of the most dependable tight end ones that you can have in Dynasty. Maybe not always. There have been periods where the week-to-week consistency wasn't your favorite, of course, but on the whole, you never felt like you needed to address the tight end position. And the quality of play that we've seen from him this season, while again, he did get hurt this season earlier, but quality of play wise, you didn't feel like you needed to get a tight end. Suddenly, at least to start the season, you need to get a tight end. But what are we looking at here? Is this hey, he'll be fine? Achilles is a big deal. So I guess, Dan, I want to look at your reaction first. If you have George Kittle in Dynasty and you're a contender and you're hoping to keep contending next season, the only benefit as a Dynasty player that you have is that you have a full offseason to solve the problem. But that requires you to start trying to solve the problem right now. So obviously you're going to have a fan reaction and get to it. But from a Dynasty perspective, what do you do?
Yeah, first of all, it's saddening to the heart to see George Kittle go down on an Achilles injury in the second quarter like that and on a big game. And in fact, it's an Achilles injury, so it does have to leak into next season. So here's what we're looking at. It's a 9 to 12 month recovery period for an Achilles injury. It's January. So you're already kind of looking at this as, even if best case scenario, he comes back in 9 months, or is at least cleared for football activities in 9 months, probably not see him till end of October. That's best case scenario. Then we have to add in the fact that he will be 33 upon his return next year, older tight end. I don't think this is the last we've seen of George Kittle by any stretch of the means, but at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if Kittle isn't really playing that much until November, December. Then you have the all added part on top of all of it, which is typically with Achilles injuries, players are not the same until the following season. So it's a question mark as to whether or not he's even going to give you any fantasy football production. There's a better chance that he's going to be around for the NFL playoffs come next year, and maybe that last couple of weeks. But to be able to play him for fantasy, real questionable if he's actually going to be available next season. Now, the good news is with him being a tight end, he's not as dependent on agility and speed to be able to be him. And he doesn't necessarily, while those things do make him really good in yards after the catch, he doesn't necessarily need those things to be a focal point of the offense. So that's the silver lining. The other silver lining is this. If you had George Kittle and you've been competing, I would have thought this past year you would have already at least started looking at the tight end position, because he was already 32, because he's going to be 33. He's getting up there. It's a position that, with the next couple of years, you're probably going to need to address anyway. Basically, I'm looking at it like this. If I'm in Dynasty, I am doing whatever I can to get a competent starting tight end and plan on that tight end being my dude all year long. And if I get anything out of George Kittle next year, it's a cherry on top. I'm not trading him away, because I do believe when he comes back, yes, it'll be his 34-year season, but tight ends age a little bit better than most of the other positions. I do believe in 2 years from now, George Kittle can still reassert himself as a top 5 tight end, because he's just that type of guy. And I think a year removed from the Achilles, he'll be okay. But you may only have 1 to 2 more seasons after that point of having an actual tight end that you want on your team. Now, I say that Travis Kelce went to 36, and even though we all sat there this past season, we're like, ugh, still finishes a tight end 6. It's the position that we're talking about here. So I think George Kittle, long-term, I'm holding on to him, but next year, I'm addressing that position knowing I need a starting tight end the entire season. I'm not counting on George Kittle coming back.
And Chase, before I kick it to you, I want to adjust the framing of the question a little bit, in that what kind of resources are you putting into this replacement? Is this like, are you looking to buy your long-term solution right now? Like, is it that time, or is it I'm going to use him as an example. I don't know that he is going to be the guy you would want to get treated like a value proposition, so to speak, but a Juwan Johnson type of player next season, where he is capable of starting the whole season. You're probably fine, but he's not your long-term solution. So which way are you trying to fill the hole, I guess?
Well, I've kind of brought it up before. My philosophy, I like strong tight end. I like strong tight end in redraft. I like strong tight ends in Dynasty as well. So Kittle, yeah, Dan addressed, he was already starting to age to that point where you were thinking of looking to the future anyway. I don't know how deep everybody wants to carry the tight end position on their roster, but hopefully you at least had some kind of younger option on your roster as well. And if you lucked out, because we had a great year this past season for tight end draft, picks, draft choices between Warren and Elijah Arroyo and Fan and the list goes on and on. Hopefully you had at least a younger option somewhere on the roster. I agree that, yeah, because he's a tight end, Dan, I agree with you that his Achilles, we don't necessarily have to worry as much about it as maybe, if he were a running back. Where I do worry about it is the fact that, like you said, he is getting older, and a big part of George Kittle's game is his blocking and power and driving off of those legs as he's blocking. When you watched how that injury happened as he was getting tackled and he was kind of fighting against the guy, he was head up with the guy and they were fighting back and forth and being pushed backwards. A lot of the same kind of action that happens when you're blocking a guy, especially from the tight end position. I worry about how that's going to affect his overall game. I worry about the chance for re-injury. I'm not a medical expert. I'm sure we'll talk, all off season with other people who know more about that kind of thing than I do, but I do worry about him for the future. So because that's the case, I am looking to find my long-term replacement. I'm not going to be able to use, in my opinion, I don't think I'm going to be able to use George Kittle to acquire that. And I'm not trading him away. I agree with you, Dan. I'm not trading him away right now because you're not going to get anything for him right now. It's fresh in everybody's mind. And unless you find somebody that's really bullish on him that wants to pay up, but nobody in their right mind should be doing that right now. If and when you do get him back, then I am looking for him to put together a bit of a successful run and then trying to sell him on the hype coming off of that, because he will be old enough. It's time to move on from him and get yourself a better long-term position there. He's a great player when he's healthy and he's a dynamic guy, and he's at a position where those guys are few and far between, but he's aging out for me. So I'm not really looking to hold on to him long-term, but you have to hold him for now. I say, go get yourself younger at the position. Go get yourself one of those dynamic guys that you can count on. And in fact, go out and get yourself two of them if you can, so that you've got options on your roster. But I agree, Dan. As soon as I saw that, I thought, man, even as not a 49er fan, just as a football fan and knowing the kind of guy that George Kittle is, he's good for the league. He's good for that team. He's good for tight end you. He's the guy. Started National Tight End Day. He's one of them anyway. I hope he comes back. I hope we see more out of him. But when we do, I think you got to sell him at that point.
Sad days, but I think you very well may be right. But yeah, I think I'm with you guys 100% of the way, and that there's no point in selling him right now. There just is no point. It's normally the case with injured guys, especially injured guys their age, where unfortunately, you just kind of have to wait it out because the value just doesn't make sense otherwise. On to our next guy, and another guy who not nearly to the same degree, but definitely had a bad day on this weekend. AJ Brown, who had one of his many tiffs, I guess you would call it, with the Eagles during this game. He had some bad balls thrown his way. He had some missed targets. And then when he gets the one on the last drive of the game, it is on target and is to him, he drops it. So he had a bad day. He had a bad day with his relationship, I think, with the team. What do we make of this? I know we've talked, AJ Brown has been the Eagles in and of themselves have kind of been one of the stories of this season. but what do we make of this? How do we move forward? If you have AJ Brown, is he someone who we still believe in the talent and we want to go buy? Is he someone that we're going to get concerned about? Because normally, as the age goes up and the diva wide receiverness continues to go up, normally that doesn't end well. We've seen that certainly in the past, that these things progress a lot quicker than we feel like they should. Where is your comfort level, I guess, going into next season with AJ Brown? Because I think we both see the talent that he is and also can kind of see how things could get ugly moving forward.
Here's what I'll say. First of all, as far as this whole, like, the Eagles are going to move on from him, I don't really see how.
Yeah, financially, it's really tough.
It's going to be a $27 million dead cap hit if they actually trade him. Right. So his out isn't until the end of 2027. That's when they would want to actually get out of this contract. So we're talking a whole other year here before they ideally are able to move on from him. And with all of the distraction and hoopla that was AJ Brown, the Eagles this season, he was still the wide receiver 11 in points per game and half point PPR. Like, so if we just get, it wasn't consistent, I'll grant you, it was not the most consistent thing week to week, but ultimately he was still finishing as a low end wide receiver 1. Kevin Patullo's gone. So if we have a real offensive coordinator in here, everything could be forgotten and forgiven. He's only turning 29 next season. He's still in his prime. I'm hanging tight on AJ Brown.
Yeah, here's the thing that everybody needs to remember too about the drama surrounding, AJ Brown and this entire offense really all season, and Philadelphia and the changes they're making. He's had basically a different offensive coordinator every season of his time in Philadelphia, right along with his quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Since your boy Shane Steichen left town, they've had a different offensive coordinator like every year. And at a certain point, like that can't be good for anybody's morale on that offense, even as they've been successful, even as they've gone to the Super Bowl, even as they've won championships. That constant upheaval that they always have leading that side of the football can't be good for everybody's psyche on that team. And especially when you're talking about your star players. AJ Brown, yeah, I mean, maybe he's got a little bit of a diva complex. He is a wide receiver after all. What a weird career arc he's had Tennessee basically dumped him off and shocked us all, trading him to the Eagles in the first place. But then, yeah, now he's tiffing on the sideline all the time. And then there's the love-hate thing that we've got going on, and we've seen going on all season with him. I don't want to get rid of him. I don't want to go all in on buying him in Dynasty until and unless I see, how his situation shakes out. I agree. I think we see him back in Philadelphia, but if he went somewhere else, I really would want to know where he's going before I want to make a full judgment on that. So I'm not opposed to buying him right now. If somebody else has soured on him because of all the drama, I don't want to go all in on it. I'm not selling him because I'm willing to still bet on the talent. We've said it before on this program. We like to bet on talent. AJ Brown is still one of the top 10, 12 talents in the game at wide receiver position. So I'm not selling him off. I'm willing to buy him if the price is right. And I'm willing to wait on buying him until I see if I like the situation, if he does in fact go somewhere.
Yeah. No, I think that's very fair. And yeah, look, I have to set you guys up with a good question, right? But ultimately, I do think that AJ Brown is still the player that he has been. The drop, of course, is unfortunate, but it kind of comes with the territory. And his drama isn't really the type of drama that I think should make you afraid. It's not like, not doing anything illegal. He's not hurting anyone. He's just being a little whiny. That happens. Receivers do it. It's fine. So I think it'll all be fine. I think the Patullo of it all will going away will kind of fix things. I am really curious because there were some immediate rumors that he might stay on the staff in a different role. Really curious how that would go over if that was the case, but nonetheless.
That would be a Cleveland type move. That's not what they do in Philadelphia, where they actually compete for and win championships.
Yeah, I don't think that'll actually be the case, but it was kind of a funny rumor immediately afterwards. Speaking of receivers, of bigger bodied receivers who had disappointing kind of ends to their season, although I think for Brian Thomas, maybe a little bit more concerning, actually, in terms of his long-term future with the team and in terms of kind of where we go from here. It's funny because A.J. Brown has been such a squeaky wheel, and A.J. Brown is older. I actually am more concerned about the long-term future of Brian Thomas. But, I mean, I'm curious what you guys think. It sure feels like they like the other options here a lot better. Like, I don't know. I want to just leave this one to you guys. Chase, you want to go ahead with this one? Brian Thomas, is he someone that you're buying? Is he someone that you see potentially moving in the NFL? Is he someone that, you are kind of reevaluating, or maybe even just going back to your college evaluation? Because I don't want to completely speak for all of us, but if I'm remembering correctly, all of us liked Brian Thomas Jr., but we understood there were limitations to what he is, especially as a route runner, especially as being a consistent target. I think he kind of short-term proved us wrong in the rookie season, and then maybe we kind of go back to that initial evaluation, and the first year was a fluke. So I don't know. What do you think about, kind of his situation in Jacksonville?
I find it interesting. I'm not necessarily sure how to fully feel about it, but I find it interesting that last season, when Jacksonville was a bottom quarter of the league type offense, and we didn't necessarily see Trevor Lawrence playing, a decent quarterback position, that Brian Thomas was like a revelation fantasy wise. And he was like what they did on offense, what they used in their pass game. He and Evan Ingram, obviously, and Evan Ingram moved on, but then they bring in Liam Cohen, who we all hoped would be good for Trevor Lawrence and was good for Trevor Lawrence. And now they are a top 6, top 7 type offense in this league. And Trevor Lawrence is playing like the champ that we always hoped he would be. And Brian Thomas absolutely collapsed this season. He literally, could not do anything right, it felt like. And every week we were waiting on him to do something and waiting on him. And no matter how much success Trevor Lawrence had, Brian Thomas was nowhere near it. He was just an afterthought in the offense, an afterthought in fantasy, unfortunately. Wasn't an afterthought if you were the guy that spent the second or third round draft pick hoping you were getting, a top 7 type receiver, because he was a big worry all season. He's still young enough. He's still good enough that I think that, it's worth hanging on to him, in my opinion, to see what he can be, especially if Trevor Lawrence is going to be good under Liam Cohen, if we're going to get a high-powered offensive attack going forward. I'm not a guy who thinks that Travis Hunter is some, revelation in terms of, offensively or fantasy-wise. I still think that there's room there for, even with Jacoby Myers around and depending on what they want to do elsewhere in their receiving core, I still think there's room for Brian Thomas to have success. I think the truth about him as a player is probably somewhere between what we saw his rookie season and this year. I think this year was just about as bad as it gets. I'm hoping it's just about as bad as it gets. If you get someone who wants to pay you for him, yeah, go ahead if you're not comfortable with it. But he's still young enough. He's still the same talent that came into the league and that lit the league on fire last season. I worry with how much he collapsed as the offense as a whole got better. I worry he's not going to approach those rookie season type levels that we see him in again. He's young enough. I'm willing to hang on to him though. So that's my take on Brian.
I tend to agree from a Brian Thomas perspective. And Dan, but I want to ask you this. And first I want to get it out of the way because I know we're going to talk about it. A lot of that production, his rookie year, came with Mac Jones. That's going to be first thing and that's fair. But even if you look at his production with Trevor Lawrence from his rookie year, it has fallen off. His stats were inflated with Mac Jones, but even the Trevor Lawrence production is worse. Dan, what I want to ask you, do you think Brian Thomas is, whether it's this season or in the future, do you think his ceiling is reached in Jacksonville? Or do you think that this requires a change of scenery for him? Because laying out the stage, they just traded for Jacoby Myers. They clearly, I don't remember any of us feeling this way. I don't think that any of us felt this way. The Jacksonville Jaguars prefer Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. So those are two locked in. The Jaguars feel that those are locked in receivers. They have targeted Parker Washington a lot over the last month, more so certainly than Brian Thomas Jr. So I certainly would not build a team this way, but if you were the Jaguars, it very well might be tempting to sell a Brian Thomas Jr. when you have three receivers who at least feel more consistent.
Well, the one thing I would say right off the jump to that is that they don't necessarily have all three of those wide receivers. Parker Washington is an unrestricted free agent heading into next season. And because they have Jacoby, who they're going to have to bring back and probably give a contract extension to, you're going to have Travis Hunter locked in. And Brian Thomas is only entering his third year of his rookie deal. Maybe it's tempting to see what kind of trade capital you get back. It's not going to be the first rounder you spend on him in the first place. And you're not paying him much because he is in the middle of his rookie contract. It's hard for me to imagine that Parker Washington is going to be in a position to get as much money in Jacksonville as he can somewhere else after his last few weeks of performance. I don't think Parker Washington's back on this team. Now, as far as the other caveats go with Brian Thomas, let me start off with the Jaguars' perspective on this. Jacoby Myers, possession wide receiver. Guy who can play slot and the Z, right? Travis Hunter is the same type of wide receiver. He's not an X. I don't really want him in the flanker position all that often, but he can play a little bit of slot. He can play a little bit of the Y. In order to make those pieces work, along with Brenton Strange and everything else and Liam Cohen's offense, he needs his Mike Evans type dude. Even if he's not going to put up Mike Evans type numbers, he needs the guy, the big guy, the X receiver to stretch the field to make the rest of it open up enough to actually work. So for the Jaguars standpoint, for Trevor Lawrence, for the rest of this offense, they need Brian Thomas, I think, to make the rest of this fall into line. Even if that means Brian Thomas winds up running the treadmill maybe a little bit more than we would like. It was a terrible season. Wide receiver, 46 points per game. Absolutely awful. But what we did see towards the end of the year was Trevor Lawrence actually play better when Jacoby Myers came in. So we didn't see a full season of Trevor Lawrence playing awesome. We saw half a season of him starting to play a lot better and then going into the postseason. A lot of that comes down to Lawrence needs a safety blanket. That much has been made clear. Jacoby Myers can act as that safety blanket. Now, once he has that safety blanket, he can work off of that to the other guys. Brian Thomas, to me, is another version, as far as fantasy football is concerned, of Mike Williams. I think he could actually be a Christian Watson, too. It was the other example I came up with in my head. You're a big play threat type of wide receiver who's probably not on a consistent basis going to see more than 4 to 7 targets in that range on a week-to-week game. And depending upon the matchup that you have, big plays could be available to you. They're not going to ask him to run an expansive route tree. That wasn't one of his skill sets coming in out of college. It was one of the reasons why I was one of the lowest rankers on Brian Thomas to begin with. Everybody else had him in his top 12. I had him at wide receiver 18 coming into the season. Because I told everybody he reminded me a lot of Martavius Bryant. Now, hopefully he doesn't wind up with the off-the-field issues that Martavius Bryant did that sunk his career. But in the sense of you're a big-bodied wide receiver, no one's really truly ready for how fast you are. And when you're a rookie and you have that kind of a niche skill set, it tends to get utilized and you put up big fantasy points. And then everyone wonders why those types of wide receivers do not pan out well in year 2. Well, because they don't really have anything else other than that. They're not great route runners. And if you're not going to consistently force feed them the football, they tend to have a slump in year 2. Year 3 is the question of, did you add a little bit more to your game? Are you willing to run, is Liam Cohen willing to feature him a little bit more on the outside for those type of perimeter routes? Do you add and we don't need a lot. We just need a little bit with his big play capability. That's going to be the question heading into next year, but they need him to make the rest of it work. So I'm willing to sit tight on Brian Thomas. Maybe he's more of a best ball threat than he is something you want consistently in a lineup from a week-to-week basis, but it's still a skill set player with an offense that has not reached its peak yet. I'm willing to see how it plays out.
So for both of you, quickly, where would you consider, and I'm going to give you context here, where would you consider his valuation to see a buy, hold, or sell at, by the way, the Dynasty wide receiver 18, which, for some context, is directly ahead of Rome Odunze. It is who is ahead of T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Jamison Williams, Devonta Smith, Travis Hunter, et cetera, et cetera. That's when we're starting to lose the conversation. And right behind, guys like Chris Olave, Lad McConkey, Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, Emeka Egbuka, George Pickens, et cetera. So within that kind of range, where do you feel about a guy like Brian Thomas at this point? Is this someone who you are trying to get out of? Because while he has already lost value, if you think that he is in the Christian Watson, Martavis Bryant range, then you probably bought him as a wide receiver 1 in dynasty terms, like a top 12 wide receiver. If he's going to fall more, then now is the time to sell. So I'm curious again, quickly, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I'm a hold. I am a hold because he is more talented than some of those wide receivers that you mentioned. I do think ultimately he's more talented than Christian Watson and Martavius Bryant, which I think could lead to a bounce back here at some point. So he is a hold for me.
Chase, same way?
Yep. No, I agree. I'm holding him. Having him ranked around some of the guys that you named off. I'm like, I don't know right now, but I also don't want to just have that recency bias and let what he did this season color my entire perception of him, because his rookie season did happen. I mean, for better or worse, we have seen the good and we've seen the bad now of him. And so, like I said, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I'm willing to hold him because I don't think that you're going to, I mean, like you said, you don't want to have to sell him off if his value falls further, and it definitely could. But I think right now, when everybody has kind of soured on the season that he's having, you're definitely not recouping anything close to the value that you paid for him. So in my opinion, I would rather hold him and see if I can at least get him to pay off on that. At some point, if his value falls further, it'll be like, oh geez, you just got to get up from underneath it. But I don't think we've reached that far yet. He's still so young. It was only his second season. Let's see how he does now in the second year of this offense. Let's see how he does. I agree with you, Dan. Let's see how he does without Parker Washington around next year. Let's see if this is really Trevor Lawrence. If what we saw the second half of the year is really what we're going to get from Trevor Lawrence going forward. Let's see what shakes out with Travis Hunter. And if they continue, there's just still too much to see about where his career goes for me to want to just get off of him because, I was disappointed in him in a redraft this season.
Definitionally, I fully agree with you guys. I will admit, league mates, I've got Brian Thomas Jr. in a couple leagues. Rome Odunze 1-for-1. I'm pulling that trigger. That one in particular.
I would too, but I would have done that from the beginning. Because I liked him.
I pre-draft also would have. Yeah. But nonetheless, while their values are right next to each other, throwing it out there.
Nope. Yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that one.
Yeah. Somebody wants to throw that at me. Definitely.
All right. We'll get through this really quick because I more or less want a yes or no on this. Aaron Rodgers, is he coming back? Chase, you're the whisperer. Was he coming back or not?
It's going to really suck to see him in Minnesota next year. Is there a better place? If he decides to play football, is there a better place for him to go? Because damn well that team is in desperate need of quarterback help. I don't tell Lachlan, my 6-year-old, that I said that, but JJ McCarthy, I think JJ McCarthy is what I thought he was going into the draft process. They need quarterback help. Had they kept one of the 37, cast off veterans that they let go last season, they probably finish a lot better than they do. They probably knocked the Packers out of the playoffs, to be honest with you. That's a team that has what it needs to actually be successful if they had any kind of quarterback play. I don't necessarily think he's anybody's answer, but are we going to put it past Aaron Rodgers to go, ayahuasca himself into a frenzy and be like, you know what, I got one more year? And does anybody put it past Aaron Rodgers to want to stick it to the Packers, even with all the kind words that he's had for them in the last few weeks? I mean, I'm on a certain level, obviously I'm being facetious here and just, he's followed the Brett Favre, playbook so well in his career here. But if I have to say one way or another, is he done? I think he's done. If you didn't sell him dynasty-wise already, you missed the boat, and you missed that boat probably 3-4 years ago. Yeah. You should have sold him while he was still wearing green and gold, to be dead honest with everybody, because now you're stuck with Ryan Tannehill. So
isn't even Ryan Tannehill? He can't even move as well as Ryan Tannehill can. Right. So it seems like a lot of the people who are around him in Pittsburgh think that this was it. This was his last year. Do I put it past Aaron Rodgers? No, I don't put anything past Aaron Rodgers, but I also don't think we're going to know until, May. So as far as the Vikings things goes, that's what everybody wants to link them to, because the Vikings, them making it move for Mac Jones, or should I say, right. I think there's better odds that Kirk Cousins goes back to Minnesota than there is Aaron Rodgers winding up on Minnesota. Especially after the way Atlanta just redid Kirk Cousins' contract, they just redid it in a way in which they can get out of it before free agency opens up now. And he agreed to it because he wants an opportunity to actually play and start, even though they're going to need a quarterback for the first few weeks. He's not hanging around for that. So I think there's opportunities that would be better options than what Aaron Rodgers is now. What Aaron Rodgers is now is like a notch above Mason Rudolph. I really don't feel like there was a huge difference there. People talk about like, oh, he did what he could with the offense. I'm like, that doesn't look like what Aaron Rodgers is at this point in his career. He's old. I don't know why we talk about him like he's anything different than Joe Flacco. Like, hold it down the fort for maybe a few games, and that's about all you can really do on an actual week in, week out basis. Like, it's over. Go out with your dignity. You took the Steelers to the playoffs, even though they go there without you every year anyway. But you have to go to the postseason, recover from the Jets. But as far as like the Steelers are concerned, I think we wanted to kind of piggyback into that conversation real quick. Now that Tomlin walked away, and I definitely don't expect Rodgers to be back in the Steelers, whether he retires or not. That gets a little bit more interesting as far as like, I kind of wanted to mention DK Metcalf. Like, could he be a buy low? Because he's dirt cheap right now. Like, no one believes in the guy. And while I still think there's been a lot of years removed from him being fantasy glory, I think he's still legitimately a wide receiver 3, given what his role is on that team and how much they're paying him. Quarterback situation, yes, definitely very much up in the air. Will Howard ain't the answer. I can, newsflash for you. And then as far as the coach goes, we don't know yet. But a new coach, I would think, means no more Arthur Smith, and that already gives you a chance. So it's kind of what I'm looking a little bit like. Can I get DK Metcalf for like a wide receiver 5 price for a guy who think it could be a wide receiver 3? I think that's real plausible right now with everything that's going on and the changes that we'll see with the Steelers really in general kind of moving forward.
Yeah, so I pulled it up really quick while you were talking there. He's currently going for a mid wide receiver 3 in Dynasty, from a Dynasty perspective. But that could very well shift throughout the offseason, and I would be candidly surprised if it doesn't continue to go down, especially if Rodgers retires. Like, the day that news breaks, suddenly you go from mediocre quarterback, but at least a quarterback, to no quarterback. And maybe long-term they're better on the other side. But nonetheless, I think that could be, he's one to monitor throughout the offseason.
Public sentiment could shift, like you just, exactly. about DK. Everybody could sour on him even more just because, there's no.
He was already bad with Rodgers. What's he going to be with no quarterback?
What's he going to be? And then they'll bring in somebody who's actually going to throw him the ball and be a little bit more mobile. So.
And my big thing being the offensive play caller being different.
Oh, yes.
Well, yeah, when Arthur Smith gets the Tennessee job.
Right.
From your mouth to the Rooney's ears. Yeah. Let's hope he's FAS.
I hope I never see him again. I know I'm going to see him somewhere. I just hope I never see him again. Oh God. So
you don't want to check out that sweet mustache?
You know where he
37 tight ends, none of whom are used correctly.
Back to FedEx?
Well, back to FedEx would be ideal, but since he's probably going to stay in the NFL, send him to the Jets. He's out of peace anyway. Aaron Glenn's not going to keep his job next year regardless of who he hires. Send him to the Jets. Just go die on that hill.
I'm cool with giving him the Titans job.
No.
Like
don't do that to those people.
Like a Colts fan.
They've dealt with
the only people who I'd feel bad for are Justin Simmons and Cam Ward.
Yes.
And quarterbacks they're good on their second teams now. Anyway. Cam Ward will be fine.
I don't want to see that for him.
It's a
Nice,
second
young,
team
soft-spoken
You
kid.
know what is funny about that is the fact that when he was with Tennessee, right, he was just the offensive coordinator. So technically, he didn't flail out as the head coach there. He was a success story.
Tennessee
He built himself into being what we all know and love. Yeah.
I mean, it'd be par for the course for Tennessee because they're horrible at hiring coaches. This is a bad organization.
They are, but that sucks. Cam Ward's a good kid.
All that and more to come over the next off season where we get our digs into our favorite guys to make fun of. Next week, we'll be back with more conference championship DFS. We'll see what the Final Four is going to wind up being. And then, Adam, I have a feeling we'll be getting into some of the rookies heading into 2026. Just get you guys familiarized with some of the big names you have to keep eye out on. So make sure you download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and check out our video content on the Fantasy Football Advice Network at FF Advice Net. I'll see you guys real soon with Chaz Filardi of Sports Betting Weekly so we can line your pockets green for the divisional round. So make sure you tune back in for that tomorrow. And until then, have a good one.